Anyhow, so, and not really botanical, but I just thought I'd let people know about these two early accounts of Native Americans written by women that are, well, Sarah Winnemucca, the daughter of Chief Winnemucca, published her account of the first contact. And it's an interesting read. And then during the allotment period in the Nez Perce Reservation, which nowadays we figure, well, that was probably not the best way to go about it, but I don't know what the correct way is anymore. But two women, an anthropologist, Alice Fletcher, in relation to the next Fletcher that we know of, and her friend Jane Gray, spent several years, on the Nez Perce Reservation, and there's an account of that. So those are just kind of good ways of sources to get a feeling firsthand from different perspectives. Okay, realized I can divide this into sections, so I'm going to. Next is the territorial years going into early statehood. Starting out with John and Carrie Liebert, who's homesteaded in northern Idaho in 1886. And Dreamer and the Doctor, gives you, lots of all the detail you want. We've had talks on that even by Nesbitt. And although only John was the active botanist, the couple qualified as a team. We are one in all affairs of life. Carrie was also one of the trained first doctor, physician in Idaho, one of them. And at this time, plants were what you used as a doctor. It was the materia medica. So she would have had to have a lot of botanical knowledge. And I also like the fact that they recorded and again photographed the Native American cultures. So again, they kept some of this information going. And also they make a link, particularly John, between Idaho and the New York Botanical Garden, the first of three links that I'll be having fun with. Because John got a correspondence going with Elizabeth Knight Britton, who was a bryologist who had married wife of Nathaniel Lord Britton. And the two of them, when they were visiting the Royal Botanic Garden at Kew, came up with the idea, why don't we build a botanical garden in New York? And they were the founders of the New York Botanical Garden. And she was a curator. And basically, she was one of Leibert's primary correspondents and professional supporters. He'd send her all the mosses and everything. So we had this early correspondence going between northern Idaho and New York Botanical Garden. Okay, skipping to the next person in the sequence is Mary Halleck Foote, who we don't normally think of as botany. I mean, she was the wife of mining engineer Arthur Foote, and she supported the family by writing and illustrating. And she was acclaimed as one of the best known women illustrators of her time, but I find that all these writings that she did, both personal and fiction, are actually an overlooked gold mine of Idaho's early natural history details, the Boise area. So where they spent a lot of their time was at the cabin at the foot of Lytle Gulch, just near below Lucky Peak Dam. And the green arrow points to the same outcrop and the book taken at their time and what you can go see now. And the Native Plant Society has helped support a native plant garden at the mouth of Lytle Gulch. So figured that was worth sharing. Anyhow, so this is one of my favorite of the examples of how this information, the stuff from both her fiction, all of her, even her fictionalized writing is based on actual events. And you can find sometimes the same thing used multiple. So this was a description, a story, The Lamb That Couldn't Keep Up, based on an actual event that happened near their camp on Lytle Gulch, where a band of, the sheep bands were unregulated. There was no grazing regulations. If you want to get rid of regulations, this is what you open up for. 8,000 sheep came through their camp and basically drank the little stream dry. And ate all of these plants, are some of the ones I think that she mentions. But then the following year, where these things had grown had become barren. That's what a band of 8,000 sheep's going through does. Okay, and then there's actually connection from Foote Oh, sorry, now I get it. I was supposed to turn this over earlier, but I'll let you have Mulford. Okay, and you can use just the back of the board, don't try the pointer.
So Isabel Mulford was a mystery to us for a long time. We had Astragalus mulfortiae, and we didn't know who Mulford was, and we didn't know it was a woman to begin with. But she was a student of botany, and she got her PhD at Washington University in 95, but she came to Idaho in 92. And I don't know what the plan was, but for some reason she started in Salem, Oregon, and then came west. So I don't know if she did a big loop on the train to see more country, but anyway, she started in Salem. Her first stop was in Nampa, and one of her very first collections was Lepidium papiliferum, which is now Idaho's rare plant that causes great concern. And she took a route that kind of followed the train and ended up in Pocatello, and she just collected all over Idaho. But while she was in Boise, she interacted with Mary Halleck Foote, and she even went out to the house in Lytle Gulch, and Mary took her out on horseback.
See what the next one is right there.
Okay. Mary took her out on horseback, and she collected this plant, and she named it after Mary Halleck Foote, and we call it Scutellaria nana now. But she did publish it, so it was a recognized name. And another of the plants that she collected was Frasera montana, and she is the authority on that species. And she had a delightful trip, but she traveled alone, and she traveled with letters of introduction, and she went by train and horseback and stage. She went to Silver City. She went to Idaho City. She stopped at the hot springs around here and there, and but she was all by herself. The interesting part is she was 48 when she did this. So she was not a spring chicken. Her father was a wheelwright during the Civil War. And I have a feeling my theory is after her parents passed, she used the money to do her own thing. Of course, we have the Astragalus mulfortiae named after her. And I have a feeling she collected it up by Fort Boise in that area. All right. Okay. So this is a new person to us that showed up in this Idaho Women book. Barbara was gifted this book, and in the back, you can put in a person's name, and so her nieces put in her name, so she's in the book too.
My grandniece.
So Mary Augusta Fletcher. We didn't know anything about her, but she went on this trip through Idaho and collected plants, and the plants are now used in various herbarium across the eastern part of the world. And we didn't know anything about her, but she left a lovely report of her trip. It's now in the state archives, and I haven't read the whole thing because it's all in cursive. So I'm reading it into my computer and then correcting what comes out wrong. But it sounds like a delightful trip. And she was born in Iowa City, and her nickname was Gusta. After she was a woman, she and her family, her folks, apparently moved to St. Anthony, where she became the superintendent of education, and her sister was a teacher that also came with her. And because she had moved to Idaho, I think she organized this trip back to her friends in Iowa and said, come out to Idaho and we'll do this botanical survey. And so her friends were John Cameron, who was a professor, and he eventually became a professor of botany at the university, Lucy Kavanaugh, and Hattie Clearman. And these three women are all the same age, and they were all born in Iowa City. So I have a feeling they may have gone to school together and known each other over the years. And it was just a natural gathering because by the time they went on this trip, they were 29 and one was 30. So they were friends. So they met up in the Pocatello and got a wagon and horses, and John and Mary Augusta, and they call her Augusta, they had cameras. So they would load their cameras during the day and they would develop their film at night in the dark. That was their dark room. And this is one of their camps above Ketchum. And the photographs, I think, are wonderful. I mean, for that time and place.
These are all at the archives.
So there's a couple gals on the snow there, and this is around Stanley Lake. So they traveled from Pocatello to Shoshone Falls, and she thought Shoshone Falls was just splendid. She said, Idahoans don't appreciate what they have. Then they took there's an old ferry that's right above the falls. They took the ferry across, and then they headed from there to Shoshone. She did not like the desert. It was 50,000 acres of lava flow, and she didn't like that. And they didn't stop. They only stopped at noon and at dinner, and they didn't really collect much. They only stopped when they had to. They didn't see much to collect. It may have been a dry year. And then they got to Haley, and they met a man who invited them to his ranch. And she said it was a lovely, lovely place. And it had fine china and cut glass. And the man was from Yale, and they shared their college days with him. And he even had a telephone. And I just can't imagine that in 1901. So then they traveled up to the Stanley Basin, and they camped there, and they thought it was fabulous. And they collected a lot of plants there. And they met this guy who helped them travel along, and he was a cowboy. And this is what he said about them. He said, I'll be darned if I can see the fun in picking flowers to ship back to Iowa. I thought I had a big story when them fish commissioners came from here, from Washington, and caught fish to take pictures. But I've got a bigger story than that now. And he does talk a lot about how many people they met along the way and how they would buy hay and stuff along the way. So I don't know. Gusta kind of knew what the lay of the land was to do this. And this is a rainy day camp. And I believe that picture there is Augusta. If I go back to that picture with glasses and the cheekbones and the dark hair. I kind of think that's her. And that would be John. And this is near Henry's Lake. And I believe we have a visitor. We have John I think that's Gusta by the stove. And I think the next one is possibly Lucy because she's rather slim. Uh, and I don't have anything to compare for Hattie, but that might be Hattie because she was a fun-loving person. She's kind of dressed up like something. And they called this camp Pocahontas, so I don't know what the joke was there. So this is Lucy Kavanaugh's picture from when she became a herbarium assistant at the university, and then later she became the herbarium curator. So she went on to become a real botanist, and she published papers on mosses. That was her specialty. And I kind of think that's her, I'm guessing. But that's a lovely photo too. And then Harriet. Harriet was a school teacher. And a few years later, after they got back from the trip, she married John. And they had 2 children. And Harriet became the correspondent for the Idaho State, or Iowa State Press, representing the scientific party from the University of Idaho. And she writes that they got saddle horses, but because of the Boer War, most of the desirable horses were out of the western states. They'd gone to the Boer War, but they had ordered theirs several months in advance, so they got really good saddle horses. And later on the trip, she said, we shouldn't have got such good horses because now we're afraid all the time that somebody's going to steal them. When they got to Redfish Lake, she wrote that they saw 9 grizzlies, and I'm sure the redfish were running that summer, and so that's why the grizzlies were there. And later on, she said, we shouldn't have brought the wagon. We should have just had pack animals. And then she went on to teach science in Iowa City High School.
Did she really live to be 103?
Yeah.
I believe she did.
Wow.
It was good life for her. I think I'm done. Oh, Broadhead. If you remember reading about Wilcox, Broadhead and Wilcox exchanged some information about plants. And she had a Primula broadheadiae named for her, which is the same Primula that we thought should be Wilcoxii. And she lived in Ketchum, Haley area. I don't think she interacted with this little expedition because they were there on the 4th of July, so it was probably a really busy time and everybody came to town, and so I don't think they interacted. At least we have no record. Her husband was a professional man, and he ended up being a clerk of the county for whatever. So when I search for Broadhead, every day he has something in the paper that has been recorded. So it's real hard to find her. But she did a big collection of plants and sent it off to the World's Fair.
Next slide.
And we've not seen the plants. We don't know where they are, but she was quite a busy botanist, and she loved her botany and had a club, and she was really a wonderful botanist for her day and her situation. Okay.
Carol takes more time for the fun detail. I cover more ground. Try to get the best of both. I don't know. Anyhow, so early botanist raised in Idaho, and I'm actually going to start out with someone who is not a woman, but provides a key link to two women. And I kind of wanted to sneak him in because he really does deserve more study. Um, James Francis McBride was one of the first significant Idaho-raised professional botanists who went on to become a professional botanist. And he's most known for his non-Idaho stuff. He was at the Field Museum and was the chief architect of the Flora Peru project, which, is never really gets finished. And he photographed over 40,000 types at Europaea Herbaria. This was one of these first ones doing that. And this was the period before this happened, World War II. And I mean, the destruction of the British Museum, as well as, the Berlin Museum and all the herbarium collections. And, he had taken photos of the types. So, kind of the idea, this is also what happens in wars. But I got interested. Let's learn more about his Idaho experience. And again, at the archives, this is where the Idaho State Archives has a lot of his records because his parents were among the original settlers in New Plymouth. The first ones to draw lots. It's a neat place. And he actually went to Boise High School, which is where I went. I mean, anybody else from Boise High? We got good company. Chris Davidson went to Boise High. Anyhow, so he started collecting plants, and there's even a little statesman write-up on him. I didn't know, this part of it had been known, but he started collecting plants for Avon Nelson shortly after he graduated. And Nelson was like, wow, these are good, and encouraged, this new kid out of Boise High. And so he eventually went and worked with Nelson, who was the main botanist in the this part of the world at this time of year at University of Wyoming in Laramie. Basically, so McBride, with solo or with others, for the next several years, made extensive collections around southern Idaho, especially around New Plymouth. All those Falk store collections that if anybody's had to figure out where the heck those are. And also the Owyhees, the first real collections in the Owyhees. And by the way, something I haven't written, counties were different back then. Yes. They were larger, and so things that would be included in Canyon County aren't in Canyon County now. Things that were included in Washington are in other counties, and that's hard to keep track of. But anyhow, so Nelson published a lot of these new species in several installments of New Plants of Idaho. Okay, so you can ask, at least I thought, so why didn't even consider, he thought about going to College of Idaho with Tucker. College of Idaho, but why didn't he even think of going to University of Idaho? Because it had just burned down. We don't tend to remember this. And basically, Professor Henderson, was so discouraged, he ended up retiring, moving, and starting over again in Oregon. So there wasn't anybody to work with on botany in Moscow, or a herbarium to work with. These things you have to take into consideration when you're doing this. Anyhow, so that was just enough for a non-woman. But it turns out his mother is worth mentioning. And there's the picture that he's actually, I saw this in New Plymouth on their interpretive signage of there's little Francis being held by his mother, Annetta. McBride himself got estranged from his father, changed his name from MC capital B to MNC B Bride. But he retained a very close relationship with his mother, who joined him in the field and apparently even went to Laramie in Europe with him. And lots of questions here of what's going on. But just right now, and in her obituary, there's the quote from Frances that she was my inspiration for many years during my own endeavors, especially during the difficult ones in Europe when he was taking pictures. All I was able to do for my science was supported by her. They loved her in all the museums in Europe. So that's, she's worth mentioning. In addition to which, she has a plant named after her. It's in synonymy of Enothera elata, but it was described as Onagra MacBridie to honor the woman who so industriously and indiscriminately assisted her son in the field during most of the season of 1910. And so it also said she was always proud of having that named after her in her obituary, even though the obituary screwed up the name to Methers. Anyhow, that's kind of fun. And actually, another way to just get at least a somewhat botanical collection, we don't know what happened to her husband, or at least I haven't yet, but going through the brief time at the archives here in Boise, she had apparently ended up managing their their orchard all by herself and became quite well renowned. And she was one of the last of the original settlers in New Plymouth. And so people were getting her biographical information together. So just, a woman who was running this orchard for the last 10 years or so of her life is kind of noteworthy at this time. The name of their orchard, Tenawa, is she was from Tennessee, or he was from Tennessee, she was from Iowa, and so they combined the two names. Okay, and then another connection here's one of the articles written by Nelson describing mostly stuff from McBride. But in this one, he mentions a Miss June Clark of Boise, at present a student at Idaho State University. And in 1911, she made very creditable collections of plants in the mountains adjacent to Boise in the mountains of Washington County of her state. And okay, who's this? Well, I actually got some information from colleagues at Boise High, and found out, she actually graduated from Boise High, and as I suspected, she overlapped McBride. And I suspect that the two of them encouraged, I don't know what exactly, who was encouraging who, but they both ended up collecting plants, communicating with Nelson. Though she ended up going to University of Idaho, not Idaho State, because that didn't exist. And her specimens are all up at, well, no, some of them are. Laramie is where most of them are. But she made significant collections, mostly from around Boise and near Tamarack, now in Adams County. And at least 364 specimens were sent to Ada Nelson at University of Wyoming. Okay, and she did get a plant named after her, the old Clarkii, probably from Clear Springs, which is up off of Grimes Creek, because that's a place she went to a lot. So, and I don't know what about it. Currently in the synonymy of Viola adunca, but it has narrower and hairier leaves than I'm used to seeing. But Viola adunca currently probably will end up getting split because it's such a huge encompassing species right now. And the other plants that Nelson described from her collection is a rabbit brush, an Eriogonum, a Lathyrus, a Lupinus, which is still sometimes treated at the varietal level, and a Salix, which is Lasiolepis. But it's the Eriogonum fasciculifolium that I want to home in. I know Beth will be interested in this. One of the ones from up near Tamarack. And because I'm using that as my tenuous link to take us to Susan Stokes, who is the one who made the combination of Eriogonum sphaerocephalum variety fasciculatum. Now, Susan Stokes was the expert on Eriogonum at this time. And her name still shows up a lot. Stanford graduate in 1894, then teaching at San Diego High School. But she, in turn, was inspired by both Alice Eastwood and Catherine Brandigee, according to the sources I have. So this is my excuse to bringing Alice Eastwood into the picture. Because she's so cool. I mean, she's basically the best known of early women botanists in Western North America. Started out developing a passion when she's actually from Canada, Toronto, but ended up teaching in Denver, got interested in wildflowers, got to know the Brandages. They recruited her to come when they moved. We'll get to that later. And she's best known for her heroic status following the Great Earthquake and Fire of 1906, same year as the Great Fire in University of Idaho. Very strange. And I even found this little cartoon on her, rescuing this specimen with Baron von Doom. So it was you behind the Great Earthquake and all this thing that. Oh, what old woman. Don't rumble a botanist if you can't take the thorns. I love that. Anyhow, so these apparently this guy has made a whole series of these that are kind of fun. Women you should know. But it's not quite, often it says she saved the types, but okay, if you dig into it, there were other people helping. I mean, she was one of the main ones, and they'd already helped by putting them separate. But they had to get them from those upper floors down after all the stairwells were burnt and everything. So it was quite and then having to move them from place to place as the fire kept coming. And then they didn't have a place to put them for several years because they didn't even know if the academy was going to be rebuilt. So it was an interesting, but they at least saved the types, or most of them. And so Alice, that's what you hear from her. And I didn't even realize she'd been in Idaho until I decided while working on this, well, now that the academy specimens have all been, they had a wonderful system for just automating a whole bunch of digitizing of their specimens and got them all done so I could easily go on to the Consortium of California Herbarium, Google Eastwood, Idaho. Oh, actually, she spent a lot of collecting time. I mean, she spent 2 years collecting plants in northern Idaho. So we get to claim her for here too. Not just by my little roundabout way of getting to her. Though I also found a few specimens after the 40s that were a different label, but wasn't Calicad labels, still said Alice Eastwood, but it made no sense. And I'm wondering, is there another Alice Eastwood that might have been active in Idaho briefly? I don't know. Okay, so anyhow, back to June Clark. I told you, this is a web. We're taking strands and then coming back again. So I wondered, why did she drop botany? Well, I'd had this posted on my Treasures of the Boise Front as one of my blog posts, and it made it to her granddaughter, who got in touch with me. And she said, I feel certain that the answer to your question is most certainly because the handsome and very dynamic Harry Rediker swept her off her feet at an early age, and she could not resist. I'm sure that's a good part of it. I still wonder, okay, was it because she didn't get picked to go to Wyoming too? Or just, what happened that may have prevented her from at least keeping it as a hobby? After spending a year making beautiful collections, getting plants named after you and other new things, to just drop it seems strange. Rediker, by the way, is the better known of them because he not only taught chemistry at Boise High School, but he's actually started Idaho's first radio station. So that's kind of fun. Anyhow, they moved to California, out of the story. But, well, maybe not, because another Boise High connection is Bernice Johnson, originally from Iceland, but they migrated west and came to Mountain Home and Rupert. Only smatterings of info on her that I have, but the 1940 census, she's listed as living with her parents. This would be, she's about 40 years old by now, and teaching at Boise High School. So there's a possibility she might have overlapped the Redikers. She's 10 years younger than June, but is that where she got kind of an interest in botany from? That's one of my, things I'd be curious to know. But she decided, she was already teaching at Boise High, and decided she wanted to pursue an education pedagogy degree at University of Idaho. And she decided that even though it's, primarily for education, she chose a floristic project coupled with extensive collecting. So basically, there's over 100 collections in the University of Idaho herbarium by here. For some reason, they stuck an E there for Bert Jornson. That's not on anything else that I've seen associated with her, but that's what's on all the collections. No new species, but they're valuable historical records, like this Abronia mellifera variety Behoviorum. I like the way that she acknowledges the aid of Harold M. Tucker at C of I. Kind of that's how she got some of her botany thing. And the result was this mimeographed key to the spring flora of southwestern Idaho. It was the first flora written for this part of Idaho, though it was intended for teaching and stimulating interest in local flora, not a technical, comprehensive thing at all. She said to focus on the spring flora. It's the best time for learning flowers during the school year. She said, basically that fall, yeah, there's still stuff there, but they're mostly Asteraceae and they're too hard to identify. So she was wise. And when I was at Boise High, we used this manual. That's how I became aware of it. And so I can, probably credit or blame Bjornson for part of my own interest in botany. And possibly if she was influenced by Clark, June, maybe going back another link. It's kind of fun coming up with where are all these depths. Several years, 10 or so years later, I went back to Boise High and said, are you still using this? They still had the stacks in the stock room. And they said, no, we don't use that anymore. And I said, can I grab a bunch to make sure that they don't just get all tossed? Because I think it is, it's not comprehensive, but it's a gold mine of fascinating nuggets. And, I figured this is worth it itself. And so here's under the Q6 primrose, and she calls it Wilcoxiana, that people who lived in southwestern Idaho in the early 1900s tell us that in spring, the foothills used to be a mass of color with these flowers. And that even in 1940, she said, surely this is a flower which needs protection. One has to hunt for it nowadays. So that's the kind of stuff. Okay, now switching to College of Idaho. And fossils, Idaho's first paleobotanist. The daughter of one of the first faculty at College of Idaho, Irma J. Smith, who the museum over there is named after. Graduated C of I and then went on to pursue her own career. She did her master's thesis at University of Oregon on fossil plants of Sucker Creek, and then PhD at University of Michigan on the fossil plants of Thorn Creek, which was up near Idaho City. And at Oregon, she worked with Dr. Ethel Sanborn. So another link to another, it's just, to me, it's amazing. Probably think there's no women in the history of this period. They're there. And they were interacting with each other and encouraging each other. But they tended to drop out of our awareness of what was going on. So 1907, she had her master's. 1914, begins teaching botany at University of Oregon. And then goes back and gets a PhD from Stanford. And then goes to Oregon State University and publishes on the paleobotany, not only paleobotany, but bryophytes and marine algae. So another woman who I haven't researched more, I might have more, but did expect this person to suddenly show up as somebody who was actually the teacher of another, Helen Smith. So while she was at Michigan, she met and married another Alex Smith. They didn't have to change her last name, though. Pat Fields likes to emphasize one of the quotes he got from her about one of them was Schmidt and the other one was Smythe. So they're really not the same. No incest involved. But I like her comment in the biography that her daughter put together that she shifted from fossils to mycology because mushrooms and fossils seldom occur. Well, she shifted, yeah, well, to botany and other things, and wildflowers, because mushrooms and fossils seldom occur together, and Alex did not enjoy toting and packing rocks very much. Okay, we have to make our compromises. Alex became a faculty member. She ended up having the salary position in the herbarium and botanical garden. But she still was active. I mean, allowed her published mushroom guides, Michigan Wildflower Guide, and was part of the Michigan Botanical Club. And I like this other quote that says, in mushroom circles, Helen may have been Alex's wife, but among those interested in native plants, Alex was often viewed as Helen's husband. Anyhow, and at Michigan, the university, at their botanical garden, there's a little wildflower garden named for her. So if you happen to go there, you might want to check it out as a little Idaho connection. Their daughter actually also followed in the footsteps of mycology. I like that last quote. She had a career in mycology since she was knee-high to a morel. But anyhow, so she, mushroom, so she had a career. Their daughter, in turn, contributed, and they've all donated back to College of Idaho too. So that's been nice. And I realized, oh, I can make another link to the New York Botanical Garden here. Because I found out that Barbara Tears, we actually shared an apartment for a couple of years, or a year. And she ended up serving as the herbarium director at New York Botanical Garden. But her father, Harry Tears, did his doctoral work with Helen's husband, Alex Smith. And where families were so close that Barbara Tears told me that Helen and Alex Smith were sort of like grandparents to me. In fact, I probably spent more time with them than I did with my own grandparents. And so, yeah, I mean, these people know each other. Well, she's married to a mycologist too. So, but anyhow, all these little connections, and is what I enjoyed looking for. And I'll give a plug to Barbara's book on herbarium, The Quest to Preserve and Classify the World's Plants, that goes to the Tears. And also shout out to Pat Holmgren that we'll get to later. And it's a tie-in also to Ellen Trueblood. People might know her husband, Ted Trueblood, better, environmentalist, but Ellen ended up getting interested in the fungi of Hawaii County and was doing this with Alex Smith. I've just recently got more information beyond what I could incorporate, but she collected, says, over 6,000 specimens and over 20 new species, at least 2 of which got named after her. I believe she helped co-publish some others. So she was an active mycologist. And she was also a friend of Pat Packard's. And apparently, she was intending to describe a Calvaceae after Packard, but that never got published. But anyhow, but that brings us to what I'm calling the Packard nexus. Just because there's so many threads I can. So anyhow, I love this picture that I got from Carol, apparently, who got it from someplace. But anyhow, for those who don't know, she grows up in both the mining community of Yankee Fork and then in Nampa on a farm. Undergraduate at College of Idaho while Boone was still there, but shifted from chemical engineering to biology. She actually survived a bout of polio the same weekend that those of you who knew Lyle Stanford came down with the polio that left him paraplegic. And the students all chipped in to help him during this recovery. Pat said her task was writing his notes on the blackboards for the classes. Did her senior project as an undergrad on historical biogeography of the local flora and fauna. So biogeography was definitely an interest early on. She earned her master's at Oregon State in '53. That's the year I was born. Okay. And Sam Stanburn was still present. So she had a chance to interface, whether they interacted much, I don't know. But there was at least this role model present. Her thesis was on the winter twigs, which has recently been, Gilkey and Packard. but that was part of what she worked with, because her major advisor was Helen Gilkey, who taught her also botanical illustration. She learned some from Stanford, but kept getting it more. Okay, so this is my link now to, we're following Packard's pedigree. And Helen Gilkey was the first woman to receive her PhD in botany at UC Berkeley. On the taxonomy of truffles, and has Gilkey named in her honor. She then got the position of professor and herbarium curator at what became Oregon State. Did a lot of illustration work, both at Berkeley for Jepson's Manual and some other places. So that's where she learned illustration that helped get Packard learning illustration. Published books on weeds, winter twigs, aquatic plants, Northwest, received an outstanding scientist award, and inducted into the UC Berkeley Women Hall of Fame. So that's one of Pat's on her pedigree, her professional pedigrees that we sometimes trace back. And then I like to take, this is a little bit just more on the influence, mentorship. You could make a link back to one of my favorite botanists, Catherine Brandigee. Because I think this is part, remember, this is Packard's pedigree, so it's also mine and Carol's and a lot. I don't know who else in this room. Well, I mean, influence-wise, a lot of you. And these are the way these things go. It's but anyhow, so she was born Mary Catherine Lane. So she was Mary Laney, is the same person as Catherine Brandigee, okay? There's various plants named Laney down in California. This is her. Then married a guy named Hugh Curran, who was apparently drunk himself to death. And after his death, she taught school to pay off his debts and got herself into the UC Medical School when it was early on. And I think she probably faced some of the same challenges as a fellow student who finished the year before her as the very first female PhD from Berkeley. Well, actually west of the Rocky Mountains. So I'm going to mention Lucy Wanzer, as this is what we would have seen that Catherine had to deal with as well in med school. That even though the state had decided that the male and female should have an equal chance in the university, the dean of the school encouraged male students to haze them. And we have to accept this woman student, but if you can make it so uncomfortable for her that she cannot stay, we will get rid of her in short order. Didn't work. And this is the kind of comeback I really love. When she was president of the night clinic, the professor charged data, woman has no business to study medicine. If she does, she ought to have her ovaries removed. She quietly replied, if that's true, then men students ought to have their testicles removed. Anyhow, okay, anecdote, whether it actually happened, but I can't resist. I'm sorry. See, I threw a few things into Carol. I didn't completely strip out. Anyhow, so going back to Kate, who would have been going through kind of the same stuff. After all that, getting her PhD, her MD, she was unsuccessful in establishing a practice. Don't know why. Instead, she became increasingly involved with the California Academy of Sciences early on, and was elected a member 1 year after the first woman was accepted as an actual member, and was the first paid position at the Academy, curator of botany in 1883. And she's actually, you go at least at 1 year, here's a display at the Academy of significant people, and they credit her. So she's been in there. And she was, I've researched her a lot because I could bore the heck with her, but don't worry about it. But she's strong-willed, outspoken. She could definitely hold her own against the male colleagues. And it was a rough and tumble period that the things that would be said about your colleagues in print was just scathing often. But they all did it. She was also, and this I find more intriguing after putting this together, she was an early advocate for experimental botany. Pat Packard really wanted to do experimental evolution. Is this where it comes from? Is there a connecting link for Gilkey? Maybe, maybe not. But turns out it was great that she was interested. It turns out that she was wrong, because she was thinking that once we get experimental genetics, we'll find out most of this variation in the California flora is actually just environmental, to the extent, and when they finally came up with the Klaus and Keckenheise transplant experiments, they found out, well, actually, no, it is genetic. And they proved her wrong, even though she was one of the ones who kind of helped start it. But anyhow, she was also involved in a contentious election. She's just kind of in the midst of stuff. But she found somebody to marry, Townsend Brandegee. They're financially independent because of his inheritance. They moved to San Diego after recruiting Alice Eastwood to take over. So they're kind of responsible for bringing Alice, and they even established a journal so she could say whatever she wanted. But then they returned to the Bay Area 1906, same year as the fire at the Academy, but they donated their library and herbarium to the University of California. The donation of over 76,000 plants effectively doubled the size of the existing UC collection of that time. Put it in world class, and again, repeating connection to Helen Gilkey. This is in one of the tributes to them. Their generosity and devotion have placed in their debt all those botanists who in future years will come to the university and study the systematic botany of the Western United States. By the time I got there, the Brandegees were pretty much forgotten. And except maybe, some of the new species that mostly Townsend had done, and just realizing how much Catherine, who was so active when she was alive, disappeared under the rug. But fortunately, there's other people who are working and bringing her back to the surface. So, and again, it's a quick return to Pat Packard. Okay, in the 50s. So she started PhD work at Colorado, didn't work out. She and what's his name just didn't get along. Teaches high school at Wendell for 3 years. Enters a doctoral program at Washington State with Marion Owenby, works on the genetics and experimental evolution of Caloportus. She's also involved in, I don't know if you know the Tragopogan hybrid species things that are, up in Washington. This gives me another excuse for WSU time to mention a couple of other women, including, I figured you want to know about Helen Ossie, or Hannah Ossie, who Aliam Ossie is named for. Well, this is all you're going to hear about her, but she was on the faculty while Pat was there, retired, but she was still around providing the role model, if nothing else. First emeritus professor, worked on heredity of, she basically had little to do with taxonomy, just happened to get a onion named after her. But she did co-lead some field trips up Hell's Canyon, which are kind of cool, jet boat trips before they had jet boats. And one of the other people who was on these same trips was one of these students, Jacqueline Packard, a different Packard. So if you query on Packard, you get her in the consortium, you get this one as well. And she began an MS master's at Washington State. This was before Packard was there, on the floor of the Seven Devils Mountain. And collected extensively on horseback and other ways from 36 to 39. She'd use a boat to get to the trailheads. I don't know, the horse gets on the boat, or are they already stationed there? I don't know, good question. But she gave up her master's work after marrying a fellow student, and they moved to California. But anyhow, over 430 Idaho collections in the consortium, and it's considered one of the four most significant collectors in the Plants of the Seven Devils Mountains that was eventually published. And the account of her trip and other items are in the Washington State Archives. So just somebody who is this person? Managed to get a little bit of information. Okay, back to Pat again. Doctoral program interrupted when her father dies, takes position at College of Idaho in order to provide care for her mother, who had some mental problems. Completes writing, and so she does manage to, several years later, finish her PhD after she's already been at C of I for several years. Achieves full professor, serves as departmental chair for several years, retires in 1989. First holder of the Stanford Smith Chair. Her classes were inspirational, creative, lots of things. challenging. She herself was sometimes difficult, but inspirational. Numerous students, including many women who continued into professional careers. So, and so here she is with one of her classes there's Carol Prentice, the second one from the left.
I did go to class.
You remember this picture being taken?
No.
Okay. Anyhow, so that's and we all remember field trips, multidisciplinary. I mean, you looked at the biology, you didn't just look at the plants, you looked at all aspects of biology, the geology, the biogeography, the human history. It all worked, it was all tied together. And that I think was some of the best stuff. And we just say, on a weekend, we didn't worry, there wasn't as much worrying about the liability stuff that so, let's hop into BEEP, biological extra-urban expeditionary putt-putt. Okay, I think that's what the band was named. And head to, someplace, just whoever wanted to. And it was fun. First botanical exploration of Leslie Gulch was this way and found all those undescribed species. I mean, she regretted having to shift from experimental evolution, which is her first love, to floristics, because that was what needed to be done. And that's what she had the resources to do at College of Idaho. But she never stopped loving experimental evolution. And also, she did get to some other countries. And among contributions, I mean, she expanded the herbarium significantly. She was the founder of Pahobig, or kind of the one who said, let's do this. Co-authored the initial Red Book of Rare Plants in Idaho. And also she built bridges with the agency botanists. And I think that's a significant thing, that, rather than just staying within academia, she realized had to work together. Partially she needed the money too, but that's another thing. And I love some of these things. She's had this real dour scowl. I mean, the Packard smile is very difficult to recognize as a smile, but it's there. And if you read what she writes, you realize just how much humor is underneath that. And this is when she's talking about, I chose this to kind of illustrate why she was successful with all the agency positions. And let's see, and how they were working at the other, that some of the other crews did. And she involved her students and others, like Linda there. And basically, what our crew has that the others don't is a concept of habitat, and then kind of get out and look around. And what's that funny white ridge? And I love the quote here: the agency men don't know what goes on our head. All they know is we got in the truck, drove right up to a certain hill, parked the truck, and walked right up to the plant, and it was downright uncanny, which doesn't hurt our reputation at all. So that's classic Pat, actually. Here's another one from, I found out she'd published Finding Funny Plants in Owyhee County in the Journal of the Owyhee Historical Society. And so everything in a desert is said to either stick, sting, or stink. We do very well on stick. We're so deficient on sting that even our nettles aren't quite up to standard. But when it comes to stink, Owyhee plants can make skunk cabbage the breath of spring. I spent more than half a century studying this particular conglomeration of plants, and all anyone ever wants to know is how to go about finding a funny plant. I've coped with Dobie mud, Owyhee County's alleged roads, buzzworms, that's rattlesnakes. Let's see, flat tires, range bowls, and I fried my eyes working on glaring white ash deposits to get those plants, and they call them funny plants. Anyhow, she's got several plants named after her. The Artemisia packardi that Grimes and I did, Stragulus cusickii variety packardi, now practice the species level. Eriogonum shockley packardi, the variety is not currently recognized. Lamation packardi, and recently published a fossil, Rosa packardi. So from Leslie Gulch. And then some of the things she co-authored with Jim Grimes was the Cymopterus Polisbargeliorum, Faciliolatia variety Mackenziorum, and both of which are named after ranch families in the Sucker Creek area in the hopes that they would pay more attention to conservation of something that's named after them. That was the idea. And then Saxiferga bryophyra variety Tobiasii, named for Nell Tobias. And so that's my excuse to talk about Nell Tobias, who was a friend and colleague of Packard's and is actually another one who is profiled in this book as pioneer environmentalist. But founding member of the Idaho Conservation League, all these conservation things that she's done, well deserving. And then third and final connection to New York Botanical Garden here is via the Intermountain Flora. And here you see the dedication page to volume 4, and there's Pat Packard circled in red. I'm right above her. I'm stopping at Pat. That's enough. But anyhow, so this volume, I had Gary Schoolcraft pencil his face in though. Volume of Intermountain Flora dedicated to field botanists who generously made their recent collections available to us, et cetera, et cetera. And so this leads me to, the co-author editor for most of the volumes of Intermountain Flora, which was Patricia Kern, who had actually started her career at getting her PhD at Seattle, where she also helped on the last 2 volumes of Vascular Plants of the Pacific Northwest. And then ended up at New York, spent her entire working career, became director of the herbarium, also associate VP and other things. But it's really another example like the Liebbergs that I started with, the team, that she and her husband Noel kind of are the team. And checked with them this morning, and they made over 2,000 collections from southern Idaho while working on in the range of the Intermountain Flora. So significant collectors for Idaho too. And the couple, it's only second time given to a couple, they got the Asa Gray Award, which is one of the highest you can get, the highest you can get in the ASPT. So, and here, just my favorite nice picture of Pat sitting there once, and 2 Pats, Pat Packard, Pat Holmgren, Noel, Jim Grimes in the middle, and Rupert Barnaby there is the one who named the astragalus after Pat. So I was behind the camera taking the photo. Cronquist, I think, had been there earlier and they had left. But it was fun. And just my last slide here of, Packard in retirement, from kept busy, including with these Owyhee County Historical Society was her main thing. Then Carol makes sure that we kept getting around on birthday field trips. And I'm going to just kind of let Carol wrap up to say, what's Pat up to now?
She is in
Come up
retirement.
here.
I just saw her today, and I told her all about the 1901 trip, and she just was enthralled, and she's happy to have anybody talk to her about plants. So, and I think she's doing well for 99. She'll be 99.
She's living near Caldwell.
Carol mentioned her birthday this year in May.
Yeah, her,
Planning to do,
yeah, what?
what you're planning for her birthday?
Yeah, I'm kind of planning an open house, and so I'll put it out for people to come by and visit with her. I should make it a week because she can't handle too many people at once. Yeah.
I mean, don't expect her to be holding up the conversation.
Yeah.
But she
Yeah.
certainly loves hearing what everybody else is saying.
Yeah.